Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here. Tim, thank you for the leadership with the veteran community. My name is Tom Davin. Up until a month ago, I was co-CEO of Black Rifle Coffee Company. Anybody hear about Black Rifle? Heck yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of fun in the coffee business. Well, I'm a son of two naval officers from Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I went to school at Duke University. Much to the great disappointment of my mother, who never forgave me, I joined the Marine Corps coming out of college. Spent 6 years in the infantry, spent a couple of years with the Recon Battalion in Okinawa, Japan, taught at the basic school, ultimately got out way back in the mid-'80s. Anybody serve in the mid-'80s? I'm probably the oldest guy. All right, got a couple others here. So I went to grad school in Boston, a little place called Harvard Business School. Went to work at Goldman Sachs with a former LRP Ranger from Vietnam, Mike Overlock, who ran the merger department. Ultimately, I missed leading troops in the field. I did not find working on Wall Street to be satisfying or engaging for me, so I went to PepsiCo. PepsiCo sent me to Taco Bell, and for the past 25 years, I've been building companies like Taco Bell, Panda Express, Black Rifle Coffee, 511 Tactical, and Oakley. And it's an honor to be here and share a few war stories with him. So, Blake, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with you and with Tim. Tim and I go way back to infantry officer basic course, Ranger School, and then his unit relieved ours in Baghdad, like 18 years ago. So I'm Blake Hall, founder and CEO of IDMe. How many folks in here are members or users of IDMe? God, that's incredible. That's amazing. Still feels surreal. I've got a pretty good scar right now. I just had some basal cell removed. Every time I went on patrol in Iraq, I was like, what am I doing in this part of the world? And so it finally caught up with me. My wife is actually did the surgery. She's a head and neck surgeon. So understanding what some of my high school and college friends would do to me when I fell asleep, I'll find out how this scar turns out. It's quite the power to have. I'm a third generation soldier. My grandfather was a command sergeant major, lied about his age to sign up for the Army in World War II, landed at Anzio at 17 years old as a Browning automatic rifleman. Won the Bronze Star with Valor at Saint-Étienne in France, spliced a line that prevented his unit from being overrun by a Nazi assault. Crawled out in front of 3 German machine gun nests to do that, and then fought in Korea and 2 tours in Vietnam. So 66 months of combat, big boots to fill. My father was West Point 76, Starman, and then commanded a brigade at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 214. And so my journey, I was at Vanderbilt University, was going through ROTC, and 9/11, changed the arc of my life, as it did for, I'm sure, a lot of the folks in this room. And knew that if we were going to go to war and I was going to lead young men, I wanted to be an infantryman. And I wanted to have everything that went along with that Ranger School. Ultimately ended up leading a unit that 2 weeks before we went into combat in Mosul in June of 2006, we had NSA attachments that were embedded within our trucks, and we were converted into a high-value target, kill capture, mission, 20-minute string, day or night, and through a string of fortuitous events, we became brigade kill capture force of choice. The brigade got redesignated as the Surge Strike Force under General Townsend. We developed some pretty good daylight TTPs for kill capture, started getting by name requests from division, and then for the last 3 months, Task Force Night and Special Missions Units operators said, do you mind if you help us target this vehicle bomb network? We'll embed operators and give you JSOC resourcing. And I was like, this is a trick question. So that was amazing. Was running around with the British SAS guys for the last few months and took down the South Kark vehicle bomb network in 2 weeks, a network that had killed thousands of civilians. So it was a pretty cool way to leave Iraq. The Cliff Notes, when I left the military, I was just looking for a way to serve and to give back. I felt like I'd almost lost a limb in terms of losing that same sense of purpose that I felt when wearing the uniform. Turned down McKinsey, was on my rugby buddy's couch for far longer than he or I both, I think, expected, like 7 months. So when we IPO, I'm going to give him a very nice couch with some stuff in the cushions. And you'll hear about the whole rest of IDME, but honestly, it started with realizing that military families had a really difficult time accessing services and benefits. They generally couldn't do it online, and veterans suffer from identity theft at twice the rate of the general public. And once I kind of saw that, I never imagined it would lead to like the core infrastructure, building the identity layer of the internet. But that's where my road started.
A few things on Blake. One is we probably, for this entire event, will talk about now and the future in startups, but a few things on Blake's past. One was his unit got extended 12 months to 15 months, was critical in the surge. We came at the tail end of the surge. You all fought through the surge. And when our unit ripped with his unit, our entire battalion was like, wow, that is a rock star recon platoon leader. And so Blake's military pedigree and experience is top-notch, including military veteran startups. Tom, you've worked at a ton of consumer companies, Taco Bell, Panda Express, Oakley, 511. You've basically kitted out the military, or the folks who want to like seem cool. And so can you talk about...
Caffeinated them as well.
And caffeinated them as well. And so like it seems like the military veteran community is actually a pretty big demographic. Can you maybe talk about that?
Absolutely. I think everybody knows roughly in the U.S. there are about 19 million veterans at any given time. There's 2 to 3 million on active duty. And if you just take Black Rifle Coffee as an example, my partner, Evan Hafer, an undersized Green Beret CIA operator, the whole inspiration for Black Rifle Coffee was he loved specialty coffee. He felt, hey, nobody's speaking to me. Kind of tatted up, former enlisted guy from the military. I go into coffee shops in San Francisco, Portland, Seattle. I feel out of place. Why can't we just have great coffee without all the bullshit and the attitude and the arrogance? So that was the germ of the idea, and he brought it to life with a guy named Matt Best in videos. And I have 3 daughters, so when I got involved with the company, my daughter said, Dad, have you seen those videos? I'm like, yes, I have. Don't worry, we're going to make it a little more mainstream. But we're always going to have an edge. We're never going to try and please everybody. So the key is to highlight that veteran cohort, particularly the GWAT veterans, give them some entertainment with social media. That created top-of-the-funnel awareness, if you will. Then when people tried the coffee, they said, hey, the coffee's actually good. I have so many people come up to me and say, Tom, I can't believe the coffee's as good as it is. It's like, did you think we were just a social media marketing company? We're a coffee company. That's what we sell. So the military veteran community was key to getting us started at Black Rifle. And now we've moved into Walmart. And great story is that after we went public 2 years ago, in fact, it was February 10th, 2022, we called Walmart, and Walmart said, interesting that you called. You are on our list because we've never taken an online brand into Walmart and put you on the shelf. So let's talk. 8 months later, we're on the shelf in 4,400 Walmarts. Today, it's a $100 million business. And so we moved out of that veteran-only cohort to real Americans who want to support veterans. So it's really the ripple effect of having an audience that you know intimately, seeing that underserved cohort, serving that cohort with not just a great product, but with some attitude and some fun. So,
Blake, your journey is somewhat analogous in that you started Troop Swap first. Yeah. And can you talk about Troop Swap to ID.me?
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure if I'm more proud of how far we've come or embarrassed about how far off we were when we first started, when you think back to Troop Swap. But I think, I'm talking to an audience, I think, of a lot of earlier stage entrepreneurs, and what you're really looking for when you're looking for product market fit is to make sure that the problem that you're solving is the right one, and that it's not the symptom of a problem, but you're actually getting at the underlying disease. And so when we first started, I wanted to disrupt Craigslist. I had looked at how Facebook started with a very deliberate market entry strategy, focused on students at Harvard, grew up with the Ivy Leagues, and said, well, if I could do that same thing with military and students, build a trusted community around classifieds, they move a lot, military bases and campuses, then maybe that could be an entree into disrupting the classified space. For a variety of reasons, Couldn't get the big companies I needed for distribution to move quickly enough. So then we pivoted and became a gated garden for offers that were only for military. It was a riff on the daily deals business model that was popular at the time. I'm in DC, so Living Social is all over the place and Groupon. But I saw two things. Like, after you think you've diagnosed the right problem, you have to look at the data to see if you're right. And what I saw from the data around active and passive churn indicated it was not a sustainable business model. And I was actually talking to Tim O'Shaughnessy, who's the CEO of Living Social, and I was like, I'm not sure what you see at your scale, but this doesn't look like a sustainable business model like e-commerce, where the metrics kind of work out. I'm like, it just doesn't look like this thing will scale. And at the same time, a lot of our brands that we were talking to said, we don't really love the idea of you having a gated garden for these offers. You don't have any users. What we really struggle with is reaching certain segments of our customer base through our own channels. And it's not just military, it's students, it's first responders, it's our pro programs. So for like Sephora, it's beauticians, it's professional truck drivers for gas stations. And they said, if you built a utility that we could put into our own channels, we would buy that. And that's when that feedback, and I was like, oh, PayPal for identity, an identity wallet. And it's the same concept with payments, but the same friction of not having to re-enroll with payments. If you apply that to an ID card, you could both streamline verification, bring these programs online, and then create a marketing channel to these very hard to reach segments. And so just listening to customers and not being stubborn, on the early concept. Like, it's okay if your early idea like TrueSwap is wrong. That baby is ugly. That is really ugly, right? A lot of entrepreneurs get vested in the initial idea and they become resistant to feedback. You have to take that feedback, because entrepreneurship done best is like a legal form of insider trading. You are getting assumptions validated or invalidated, and just like a combat patrol, you can either stubbornly try to execute a mission, irregardless of what the context is or what the enemy's trying to do to you, or you can adapt. And great entrepreneurs adapt. I will say it can be really, really lonely, because you've also pitched a vision to investors, you've pitched a vision to employees, and when you realize that you're wrong, it's really hard to say, hey, everything I just told you, it's like 90% wrong. But here's what I learned. And honestly, like, if you've got it right and the logic follows, they'll follow you too. But it can be really daunting to try to throw out a whole business model and move. But for us now, 120 million users, we're worth about $2 billion. You got to do it.
It's called a pivot.
Pivot, yeah. Yep.
Blake, want to riff off something you said, which was just investors. And one of your first investors was Moonshot, a venture fund that invests in veteran founders. And how did that come about? I've seen you and Kelly on stage before, and I just want you to tell the story.
Well, first, I just want to commend you for what you're doing here, bringing this audience together. It's wonderful to see the next generation of military and veteran entrepreneurs and that next wave of innovation, Tim. So thank you for being a catalyst, because I know the impact that Craig and Kelly had on my life at Moonshots. Brad Harrison is out here, and Scout as well. I didn't know what the hell I was doing when I first started. And you'll find this at all stages of evolution of the company, that you just do not know. You don't know what good looks like at a certain stage. You've never done it before. So how can you manage or lead what you don't know? And that's where mentors and coaches who are true experts who give you advice are invaluable at every stage. For me, I had a classmate at Harvard Business School, Brian Kaufman, who's an early investor. He gave me a call. I was playing Call of Duty with my buddy Anthony Bengay from the rugby team. It was like, David Tisch wants to meet you for coffee on Boylston Street. Are you doing anything? And I looked at Anthony and was like, sorry, man, but I'm gone. And the Tisch family owns, the New York Giants and everything else. So he wrote a $20,000 check after a 30-minute conversation over coffee, and then met Kelly Purdue at a conference, I think out in Sun Valley, and said, met this former Army Intel guy, he's Ranger tabbed, seems like a great person to have on your board. And so that was my introduction to Kelly through David Tisch. And then Kelly really took me under his wing. I called him so much for advice that he had an app that tracked the top 10 phone numbers. I knocked his wife down to number 2. And so he's like, I love you, but we need to talk about time management. And I was like, okay. Now we talk, once or twice a quarter about business stuff, far less frequently, but he really made all the difference. I would not be an entrepreneur today if it wasn't for Kelly Purdue, and I'm sure you're going to have that same kind of impact on folks in this room.
Tom, so much of defense and military veteran founders today is defense tech dual use, but you are consumer, consumer, consumer. Can you talk about why that's the case, or maybe it's accidental, and what you think about consumer companies?
Yeah, I've always loved consumer brands and always wanted to be part of a company where I love the product, whether it's Taco Bell, where I still eat a couple of tacos a week, or Oakley, where I rock sunglasses. I still have a discount on product there. It's a heck of a deal. But brands are emotional. Brands are about experience and creating something that really lasts. So I've always gravitated towards brands, something I can share with my wife, my 3 daughters, et cetera. So I always look for brands that I can be proud of and want to be part of, and brands that are on the cusp of just breaking out and really being in a position to grow and become national or international. Good example would be Panda Express. I joined Panda Express in 2004 to work with Andrew Chung and his wife, Peggy Chung. They had asked me to come be their CEO, and I said, wait, I'm going to go work for a mom and pop Chinese restaurant company? Is that just crazy? And ultimately, it turned out to be a pretty good move. When I joined the company, they were doing about $500 million in revenue. So unlike Blake, I'm not the startup guy. I'm not the 0 to 1. I'm the 1 to whatever. So in the case of Panda, $500 million-ish of revenue when I joined in 2004. Last year, they did $5.5 billion and $1 billion of cash flow. Privately held, all company-owned restaurants, maybe 1 or 2 franchise units on military bases. But in that case, having worked at Taco Bell, pattern recognition skills, I saw that if there was going to be another fast food national chain, it was likely to be ethnic, likely to be something that a lot of people enjoy and find it hard to cook at home, right? So, who cooks Chinese food at home?
My mom, maybe. That's the only person.
Right. And then orange chicken, of course, is highly addictive. So when I got to the company, I said, by the way, let me see the recipe for orange chicken. At the time, it was orange flavored chicken. They called it OFC. It's like, I'm looking at the recipe. There's no orange in the recipe. There's no orange flavor whatsoever. So we added orange zest, and we got rid of the F, got rid of the flavored chicken, orange flavored chicken. Now it's orange chicken. It's 40% of the meals served at Panda have orange chicken. But that was an example where at the time, Panda Express, hard to believe 20 years ago, was a West Coast mall-based chain. I had been building freestanding restaurants at Taco Bell with drive-thrus, and I said, we can take this across the U.S. We went to Dallas, Texas, Miami, Florida, and in the first couple of years, we bombed. It was a disaster. People had no idea, what is Panda? I don't want to eat a panda. What the heck is going on? What's in that orange chicken? But we knew we had a brand. We hired great people to bring the brand to life, great service. And the model is such that because you cook ahead of time and put it out on the steam table, it's what Chipotle does today. Unless you turn that food very quickly, you have to throw it out. So the big advantage Panda has is that they've got the volume to where they can cook, put it on the steam table, serve it, and just keep turning that food over. All the other competitors with lower volumes, they're either doing cook to order, which is what? Really slow, or they're putting the food out and leaving it because they don't want to throw away the protein because it costs so much. So either way, it's impossible to compete with Panda. All right, who's number 2 in that space? Nobody. It's really, the local mom and pop Chinese restaurant chain. So that's an example of an opportunity where I saw this could be a national chain. Now it's going global. I took what I learned at Taco Bell and really combined it with basic military leadership skills, but that's another topic.
Actually dive into that, basic military leadership skills, and applying that into companies or startups.
Yeah, I would say what I find in business is the great news is we have all these metrics, right? All the numbers, I call that the hard stuff, all the quantitative metrics you can use to keep score and run a business. It's outstanding, and the minute you take money from investors, whether it's early stage, seed round or A round investors, or in my case, I took $350 million from public investors 2 years ago. What do investors want? They want a return on their money, right? Love is conditional when it comes to investing. It's not like your Labrador at home, unconditional love. All right, when you deliver the goods, you're loved. The problem with that is when you talk to your team as a leader inside the business, if all you talk about are the numbers, they sit there and go, wait a minute, boss, you own more equity than I do. You're probably making more in cash compensation than I am. So the big conundrum we have to deal with as leaders, particularly early stage leaders, is you've got to hit the numbers, but you're bringing a team on a mission. So it's the soft stuff that drives the hard stuff. So the key is, I believe, you have to have that higher calling, like, why are people here? So in the case of Black Rifle Coffee, we're not selling coffee. We're selling the notion that, hey, if you're a veteran, you're a guy like Evan Hafer who dropped out of the University of Idaho to become a Green Beret, got out of the military as an E6. Evan likes to say, if my dumb ass can start a business, then any of you military veterans can start a business. That's the higher calling there, along with honoring those who serve, not just active military, but veterans, police, fire, et cetera. And the way we do that is with the social media and the coffee. So if you can put the soft stuff first and have the patience to drive teamwork, mission, culture, just like we learned to do in the military, then you'll get the numbers on the backside. But if I stand up there as a leader and just berate people around, we need, higher sales, better gross margin, lower OPEX, all that stuff, that drives disengagement. And if you've seen the numbers from, any of the surveys that are done among workforce engagement right now, we have a crisis of apathy in America. And we all, as military leaders, we understand how to put the mission first, take care of the troops, the Marines, the sailors, the airmen, and really have people feel like they're doing something special. And when you get that right, the numbers follow.
Blake, can you talk about what gets you motivated about the business, and then maybe also what keeps you up at night?
Sure. So I think the first thing about the business is that the mission matters. Right now, we help people get access to unemployment benefits. We help people who are going through a really onerous process of gathering their tax documents, save literally hours of their life by being able to access those things online. So when we don't work, we can have a really negative impact on somebody's life. And when we do work, we have an amazingly positive impact on people's life. And I think we're literally knocking down Chinese military units that are attacking state government agencies. It's happened. Caught one guy on the liveness step wearing a People's Liberation Army undershirt as he's attacking two state government agencies. So I mean, there's no sense. I feel like I'm serving as much right now as I did when I was wearing the uniform, just in the cyber realm. When you look at the amount of money that these foreign nation-state adversaries are targeting and exfiltrating from the country. So that matters. I think what keeps me up at night is a lot of what Tom just talked about. It's you have to have so much. You have to care and love people. You also have to diagnose whether they're at the right level and you're capable of doing the job. You have to be aware of your own limitations and what you are weak at and where you have blind spots and algorithms that get you in trouble. And then you have to be accountable for all of that. It is really hard to be a good founder and to be a good leader, to hold all of that at once, because you will make mistakes. And it's honestly the soft stuff and the awareness that gets you through it. I learned that in the military, that you have to have a core expertise that you bring to the team that they will respect you for. You also have to know where that expertise stops and where you need people who are smarter than yourself. And that's been true for my first platoon, where I just come out of Ranger Tabbed, Airborne. I'd gone through Expert Infantryman badge, so I had that too. And I was sitting down with these NCOs who are all in their early to mid 30s, and I was like, listen, was like, I know you guys respect the degree and like this stuff, but like there just ain't no way that I know how to set in an ambush or conduct a raid better than you guys have been doing it for over a decade. So I was like, if I'm fucked up, like tell me I'm fucked up, but never in front of the guys. And just like the smiles that came around. And I think that basic principle from a second lieutenant all the way through, you have to be aware of what the company needs in terms of cross-functional skills to succeed against its mission. And if the mission matters, it'll carry a lot because people will be invested in the mission. And then you've really got to go through this cycle of learning how to assess, I think, executives at different levels of capability and understanding what good looks like. And what good looks like at a $15 million company is different from a $50 million company, is different from a $100 million company. And honestly, in hypergrowth, we quintupled. We went from 16 million in revenue to 130 million plus in 3 years. And it's like asking, second lieutenants to become majors in 3 years and majors to become generals. It just doesn't happen that way. And I think that's one of the hardest challenges of like professionalizing the team while still loving the people that got you there. And it will rip part of your soul away if you're fortunate enough to be successful. So be careful for what you wish for. But I mean, honestly, if the mission's right, if we've diagnosed the right entry point in the market strategically, making what is complex simple, if we do these 3 things, we're going to win. And then assessing you don't lead the whole company, you lead the team underneath you. Are the people who report to me great? Are they people that I would work for myself at a different part of my career? That is ultimately my litmus test, because the sphere of compassion isn't the one person. It's the whole ecosystem around them. They're changing the arc of the 5 to 7 people who report to them, and then the 5 to 7 people who report to them, and our customers and our users, and we're responsible for defending the American government. So that sphere of compassion, as you scale, has to be about the ecosystem and not about the individual right in front of you, and that's why command is lonely, that you're asked to do what is best for the collective and not what is necessarily best for somebody that you really love and care about. And there's just all these layers to it. I'm still trying to figure it out, but that's why having really great people around you to help you navigate that stuff is important.
Yeah, that's a real art. It's all about judgment. There are no easy calls when you've got to make the tough decision that you've outgrown somebody.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And I think Anand Mehta, as our chief people officer, he ran talent for Ray Dalio at Bridgewater for 10 years. And I'd be in conversation with executives, and I go, executives who are struggling, and I go, Anand, I couldn't have been more clear about exactly what I want this person to do. And he's like, there's not going to be any change because he can't see what you see. And you're asking him to do more, but he doesn't know how to think creatively about how to execute on it. And he was able to predict failure from these conversations, like, repeatedly. And I'm like, well, what is it? Now there's a scientific way to screen for it. It's called stratum, which is like we all hear the same question, but in the same words, but our brains process it in different ways. And it turns out the systems level thinkers think over time horizons that are different from tactical and linear thinkers. And so even like a basic question, if you were to ask somebody, what's the value of a bachelor's degree, right? The answer you'd get from like Thomas Jefferson would be quite different from what you get from a high school student. The high school student might be like, well, Bachelor of Arts, Bachelor of Science. Jefferson would go, what's the purpose of education? Mm-hmm. And what does that mean at a country level, at a community level, at a team level, at an individual level? So what's interesting is system-level thinkers, they reject the premise. They often start with the end that you're trying to solve for, like, well, why are we doing this, right? And you can go down, but you can't go up. And what's remarkable is you can ask all these benign questions, and like you can start to feel the level at which people process information. And there's a mathematical distribution. They're true systems-level thinkers. It's like 1 or 2% of the population that are truly thinking over these time horizons. And so learning to screen for that in a methodical way, you can start to see it bottoms up, but it was like a revelation that you could actually like test for this up front and improve your selection for executive hiring.
Fascinating.
Tom, do you want to talk about executive hiring, given it feels like you've done a lot of that?
Absolutely. So I'm big on culture. So, you think about the soft stuff driving the hard stuff. I look at business as a pyramid. So at the base of the pyramid, it's all about mission, culture, people. You want to hire people, I believe, who are culture carriers, somebody who can model the culture, somebody who understands the whole notion of leadership. Can you walk the talk, right? A lot of people can talk the talk. Not everybody can actually walk the talk, And it gets back to all the basics we learned in the military, stuff that, as a Marine, I learned going through officer candidate school and the basic school. None of this is that complicated, but look at many civilian leaders. How often do you see just an absolute dereliction of what I would consider the basics? Building trust, making sure everybody on your team knows you care about them and you're invested in their success at work. I like to say to people, hey, I'm one greedy, aggressive individual. I want to do really well. But guess what? The way I'm going to do that, I'm going to help you achieve your dreams. I'm going to help you achieve your dreams. I'm going to help you do more than you thought you could do in this competitive environment of business. And if all of you win, guess what? I'm going to do just fine. And once people know you care about them, then they're going to care a lot more about the business. So I always start with, is this individual a culture carrier? I think, Blake, you were referring to the trait of adaptability, which I find is very difficult to assess, but it's something we look for with behavioral interviews. Then I look for people who are going to have a good time at work, hit it hard, but be really positive. I find that if people are negative, they tend not to change over time. So I like people who are unreasonably optimistic, particularly in an early stage company. You need a lot of optimism, right? Nobody wants to have, Debbie or Danny Downer hanging around, because life's too short for that. So those are some of the things that I look for. But the key is, at least in my experiences, I don't want to be the only one making that call. So you have to teach people on your senior leadership team how to screen for what's really important. Then you spend a lot of time interviewing people up front. In virtually every company I've been part of, all the way down to hourly folks, I say, I've got to interview people. So what does that do? All of a sudden that elevates the whole effort. Like, wait, the boss wants to interview somebody who's going to be a customer service rep or somebody who's going to be on the front line at the company store. And I always say, don't make me the last one to interview people. Because if I, come at the end of the line, everybody else like, this is a great person, let's go, boss, and you say, no go, everybody's wasted a lot of time. So I say, put me in the middle of the process. That way, if I'm going to veto somebody, it's more of a learning experience without wasting a lot of time. But the minute you as a leader say, I have to interview everybody, that changes the whole process and elevates it.
A lot of what you all have said are military best practices that work in the civilian sector. Let me play devil's advocate. What are things that you should not apply from the military in startups or big companies?
Well, in my case, there's a lot because I was in the military before cell phone cameras. So it was a very different time. When I got my gold parachute wings, about 30 individuals pounded the gold wings into my chest. You can't do that stuff anymore. So what we try and do at Black Rifle Coffee, we have half of our employees are either veterans or veteran spouses, therefore the other half are not. We try and avoid the tribalism that we all experienced in the military, which is great. It's terrific for trash talking and that kind of stuff, but it can be counterproductive. So we try and make sure people know, hey, if you weren't in the military, you didn't serve, that's okay. Now you have to get used to some of the military buzzwords and the, meet me at 1500 in the coffee shop, that kind of stuff. So we try and make it a more open, inclusive environment, whereas in the military, very often it was tribal and exclusive. So that, to me, is the big difference.
Yeah, I think you don't hear a lot about showing vulnerability when you're wearing a green suit. You just don't. And yet that often is what makes your team want to follow you, is about being open about your own shortcomings. They already know what your shortcomings are. Making them see you as human as well and what you're going through. And I think, when you're in a force that's training, young men and women to go into combat, showing vulnerability is just not something that might be a trait that's conducive to combat operations. But it's unbelievably critical in the civilian world to really connect with people on a deeper level. And then I think there's this notion of the cerebral element that a lot of stuff, that we might have experienced as younger officers, enlisted folks or whatever, is more straightforward and linear. And when you're dealing with more cerebral work, where things connect in nonlinear ways, you need to really change your framework for how you assess like effort. And I firmly believe that that 99% of people show up to work wanting to do a great job, and they want to commit and work their tails off for you if you can really reach them and touch them in the ways that Tom was talking about. If they're not able to do that, you really have to understand, is that a cognitive thing where they just don't see the world that way? That's not how their brain works. Or is it a skills and training thing, in which case it's your fault for not enabling them and for training them? And when you see that way, it changes the way that you lead. If you've played sports and there's a kid who's not fast, if the coach was like, if you only cared a little bit more, you'd be fast. Kid would be like, what the fuck? Come on, leave me alone. So but I feel like that's what we do in the civilian world sometimes. And I think understanding the nature of why somebody isn't able to perform the way that you want them to, and once you can see it, if it's a cognitive thing, you can be really cruel to people if you berate them, and because they're trying to do it, they just can't see what you see. And so there's an element of this scientific method and being able to assess skills, training, cognitive and systems level ability that allows you to lead with more empathy, because they're trying their best 99% of the time, and you can manage that situation in a way that's much more human. And I don't know that like the military is kind of on the cutting edge of HR in that way.
I'm going to ask a few more questions, but please start lining up behind the microphones. There's 2 microphones, and then we're going to go to questions from the audience pretty soon. Tom, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the military mode of sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. It doesn't work so well in business.
How can we in the audience help you all in your companies these days?
Honestly, my ask is like, if there's a way that I can help you, please let me know. I've had so many people. The wonderful thing about the military and veteran community and about just entrepreneurship in America in general is that folks want to help you. They're like your employees outside of the company and to help. I've had so many people that have had no equity, no compensation. They just believed in what we were doing, that wanted to help. So if you drop me a line, blake@idme is my email address. Like, just let me know how I can be helpful. I am strapped for time. So part of being a really successful founder, when you deal with, and just executive, when you deal with busy execs, make it one paragraph with a single ask at the end, and that'll allow me to engage and help you. But I want to do what I can to pay it forward.
Yeah, I'll just build on that by saying support veteran entrepreneurs and veteran-owned companies. That's what you can do, and that'll help me ultimately.
Last question, then we'll open up to the audience from me. What advice do you have generally for the crew? Blake, you gave me advice a few months ago. Get a, not just a standing desk, but a walking one. But more, I mean, that's very tactical, but any operational strategic guidance for the audience, and think of the audience primarily as founders who are pre-seed, seed, 250K annual revenues at maybe 2 million.
Yeah. So a few things. You definitely you need great mentors in your life who've been successful in the areas that you want to be successful in before. That's number one. You need to be self-aware of where the areas of your passion and your true expertise intersect, so that you're really locked into that, because that's where you're going to be credible as a leader. It's your enduring source of credibility. And then 3, I think there's different books you can read. Steve Blank's 4 Steps to the Epiphany is my FM 7-8. It's a scientific method for how you build a company. Jeffrey Moore was the first one who applied the scientific method to market entry and customer segments, crossing the chasm. And then as you get to more scale, there's Zones to Win, which is about how you do resource allocation across where your business's product market fit versus longer time horizons. If you listen to folks like Andy Ratcliffe, who's a Hall of Fame, Benchmark Capital and also Wealthfront, he'll note those same books. If you really internalize those lessons, there is a doctrine to building a company, and you can apply those insights into strategy to help you iterate and find fit and scale.
And my ad would be, one as a leader always has to be intentional about the mission and the culture you're trying to build. It's a campaign that never ends. You have to pound away on it, which doesn't mean that you begin every meeting by reciting the company's mission or putting somebody on the spot. Johnson, what's the company's mission? But it's really a matter of storytelling. So give an example of a frontline employee or teammate who did something great that really reflects on the mission you're trying to bring to life. So, yeah, I like to think about meetings like going to church, right? You go to church, when you walk in, do they pass out the collection plate right away? Typically not. Generally have music and greetings, and there's a little talking. Then in the middle of the session, boom, collection plate comes around. That's why I run my meetings in business, right? So there's music, there's greetings, we chat, and then in the middle of the meeting, okay, Johnson, how you doing on the revenue numbers? Smith, where are you on gross margin? Then how do you wrap up? More music, fun, things like that. But be intentional, right? Drive that mission home. Do that in every meeting. People don't want to hear a lecture, they want to hear stories. So.
That's awesome.
Sir.
Hey, how's it going? Sean from Flash Cash. You had a really, first of all, Tim, thanks so much for putting this on. Thank you both for being on the first panel. This was awesome. There was a really interesting discussion, particularly you, Blake, talking about the humility of the pivot and knowing when it's time and having that humility to be like, oh, shoot, my idea was wrong or my idea needed to be adjusted.
Yeah.
The flip side, maybe the other side of that spectrum, is the idea that you have to be really persistent with an idea to bring it to fruition, right? I think anybody who's ever done anything in this room would agree with that.
Yep.
So can you both maybe speak a little bit as to how you identify where you're at on that spectrum, when you know that something's working enough to keep it going, or when you have that intuition? And can you just speak to that? Can you speak to that spectrum, please?
Yeah. So I'll talk, about the time that Kelly and Craig were investing in me at Moonshots. I would have, as a pattern, investors that would say, I'm going to invest in you and I'm going to write a $50,000 check. I don't really believe in the business model, but I know you're going to be successful and you're going to figure it out. And then they would send me a picture of their kids and be like, this is her college fund. I was like, this happened not once or twice, but many times. And I was like, what is that? They're like, your idea sucks. I believe in you. My kid's future depends on it. And don't screw it up. I mean, it was just like the craziest thing. And I think, if you go through, General Petraeus is now a friend of mine, which is also surreal. Your job is to get the big ideas right and to diagnose the nature of the thing. But then it's to have the metrics to oversee the implementation of the thing, and then you iterate out, right? Are the metrics lining up to what I think is true? And if not, pivot. And so what I was always explicit with, and I think why it built trust, is when I talked to investors, I had weird detail of the users and of the customers that we were going after, like really, really deep, very specific. And I said, look, these are my assumptions. As we deploy this capital, what we're doing, don't pay attention to the spreadsheet of getting to 100 million in 5 years. There's a VC from Growtech. He said, you make up the numbers, we'll make up the valuation. Run it as a series of experiments and say, these are the assumptions that I have, and I'm going to validate or invalidate these things as true or not. Depending on what I learn, I'm going to pivot the business accordingly. And I've always run the business that way, and that's how you find kind of oil. It's how you pivot. And so there's accountability that as you run it, if investors see that you've learned something that nobody knew about the market before, that's truly what a startup's trying to do. It's trying to find a secret that nobody else knows about that's serving an underserved part of the market that can turn into a business. So that framework is what I think gave investors trust and also allowed me to look at the metrics and go, I don't think I diagnosed the core problem right because users and customers are not reacting with their clicks or with their wallets the way that they would if I was actually correct in the diagnosis, so I need to change it.
Hey Blake, Jonathan Hansing from Wallaby. Wallaby AI, I hope to be kind of in the early version of where you were probably a few years ago. You mentioned with executive hiring that the skills that you're looking for or the ability to scale changes between 15 million and 50 million and 100 million to a billion, presumably. And you mentioned like it doesn't really work like that, but you did it. You scaled across all of those different valuations. So what was different about what you did than what you hire for or what you're looking for in your executive teams? How did you pull that off?
Yeah, still work in progress first. But I think the pattern that I noticed with executives who were scaling and those who didn't was I would go to executives who were doing great, and they'd be like, there's a lot of shit going on, but like these are the 3 things that matter. And they'd be like, do you agree with that? Yep, I agree with that. Okay, what do you need to help get that done? I go to executives who are struggling and be like, give me the list of what you're working on. It'd just be, and I say, okay, well, what are the 3 things that matter? They all matter. You go, no, but like, how are you giving direction to your team, right? And then you go through and you go, actually, these 3 things nest under here and this nests under here. So I think part of it is the way that my brain works at a systems level is I'm able to understand the relationship between concepts in a way that some executives are not. And I do think it's different from SATs and ACTs, but it is something you can screen for. So that is helpful in terms of having the latent ability to see things at a systems level. What I'd never done for was I'd never seen what executives and the skill and the behavior in these functions looks like. Tom has seen a lot more of that, scaling these companies to heights of billions of dollars in revenue. That's where you need mentors and folks who you can really like rely on to outsource, like, are they really good at the function that they're gonna lead? And I think just being, again, self-aware of what you can like see, and then Anand taught me the doctrine to understand that people hear the same things, but their brain has different frameworks that process things persistently across different time horizons and levels. And then leaning on true experts in different fields where your investors can provide a lot of help for you to assess the skill part of it, that then you just have to really get the culture and the team fit right. And so as a first-time founder, you really, really have to seek knowledge outside of yourself if you're gonna be able to pull yourself up to get to that next level.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Tim, Tom, and Blank, thank you for your time. Joel Beam, Brave Capital. Raising money is very challenging for first-time entrepreneurs that don't have pedigree that their peers on the civilian side might have. So I'm curious in your own journeys, what did you find helpful as you started to seek capital and engage with venture capitalists? What lessons did you learn? What advice would you give in terms of dealing with a lot of conversations, potentially rejections, not a lot of feedback? How did you mentally overcome some of that to continue to dig deep and get your companies initially funded?
Yeah, you go. I'm sure.
Yeah, so I use the Black Rifle Coffee example. I was one of the early investors there, and it goes back to Evan Hafer. We talked about Evan seeing the unmet, underserved cohort of military GWAT veterans out there. And Evan was looking for somebody who kind of got the joke, that you could build a business by starting with community, powered by social media, selling them a product, which in this case is coffee. And he was just one of these relentless people. He had a couple businesses that didn't work. One of his early founders before I got involved was backing a company that was like survival tools. And he kept saying, Evan, you're splitting your time between the survival tool company and their coffee company. Stop with the goddamn coffee. The barriers to entry are too high there. It's never going to work. Do you know how many coffee companies there are in the U.S.? Just spend all your time on the survival tool company. And he just never quit. He kept going. Then he met me and some people out of Chicago, and we put $3.5 million in the company in 2018. So I think the key is you got to be a little crazy. You just can't take no for an answer. We chatted about this last night with Larson, Jensen, and Brad from, what's the name of Scout, yeah. It's like, hey, in the military, what do we learn when you go through any kind of training? Job one, don't quit. Just don't quit and you'll get through. So I think that's number one, is don't quit.
I think also what I did with the early investors, I would pin them down. If they wouldn't write a check, I wanted to know why. And don't settle for the bullshit stuff because they want to keep you happy in case it works out. They want to be able to invest in you later. you really have to dig it out and make them tell you. And so I think even for like David Tisch, you know, or like follow-ons and stuff like that, it's like, it feels like you're spending a lot of time on business development and not on product. It's like, you're saying that like it's a bad thing. He's like, it is a bad thing. And he's like, read Steve Blank's book. You know, it's all about the product. And then Paige Craig, when I talked to him and he goes, who's your alpha customer? Like, you know, military, whatever. He goes, who's your alpha customer specifically? Oh, okay. So came back and, you know, again, if you're listening and if you're self-aware and you really get to the root of what they want to see, there's so much knowledge within this room about what it takes to do something the right way and how to go about, you know, finding that. And once you see it, for what Paige Craig said, you can listen to like Paul Graham from Y Combinator. It's better to build something that a small group of people love, exactly what Black Rifle Coffee has done, than what a lot of people are lukewarm about. And those are the most powerful stories and novels. They're not built for everybody. They're built for a specific audience. And so what I really love what Tom talked about, storytelling. If you're going to tell a story, you have to know your audience. And if you're really this milquetoast sort of high level, no, this is my segment, you really have to know them. Because once you know them, you know what makes them laugh. You know what they care about. You know what they're concerned about. And you can build a brand and marketing that intersects with those needs and those passions in a way that really connects.
Good afternoon, or good morning. Louis Gelinas, it's afternoon out on East Coast where my team is, but Louis Gelinas with Rivet Work. Blake, you seem to have like a very clear framework for assessing specifically executive hires. I'm wondering if there's a resource, or whether it's a book or a blog article or a thinker, or if it's just something you've developed on your own. And then would love to hear from you as well, Tom, about the way you think about that. Specifically, where can you go learn more if you think there is kind of a way to see who's the systems thinker that'll be able to grow your business?
Yeah, so two things. I had the fortune to befriend Elon Musk a few months ago, brought him to Army Navy. He's pulling for Army, go Army. It was awesome to walk out onto the field with him. And so when you think about how his brain works, he's thinking about making humans multiplanetary across millennia. Who thinks about that? like, honestly, you know, most folks are focused on their own lifetime. And so you can kind of see it out in the wild. You're like, damn, there's people who are thinking about time horizons in very different ways. So the way that we've operationalized that, there's a guy named Herb, and then his colleague Michelle, that literally will walk through these very benign questions, like should we legalize cannabis? What's the value of a bachelor's degree? And don't really care about, I mean, maybe the cannabis question is interesting in the context of employment, but whatever you answer, we don't really care about what you answer. We care about how you structure it and how you view the problem. And they have a method of actually categorizing different levels of people's ability to connect relationships between concepts. Again, if you shoot me an email, I'm happy to make an introduction to that firm. It becomes quite important when you've scaled over $100 million in revenue.
I'd recommend Simon Sinek, Start With Why, if you haven't seen that. I mean, it's kind of basic, but really profound.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Hi, vertically challenged. Thank you so much for sharing your stories. I'm Melody McFessel with Sisonics, and we're building a company that's going from that 0 to 1 stage. And we're lucky, we have some early adopters, but I'd love to hear any advice that you have on how you work with those early adopters and how you continue to scale in terms of focusing on their pain, focusing on how you solve their problems, and just kind of keep that going to gain momentum. So we've got a couple of early adopters, and we're trying to grow that. Love to hear your
What's
advice.
the nature of the business?
The nature of the business is a sound subscription service to help with psychedelic-assisted therapy. So our main customers are clinicians who are busy, they don't have a lot of time, and we're trying to reach them and connect with them.
Are the early adopters representative of the broader market that you're selling into?
They're clinicians and researchers, so yes.
Yeah, it's hard to give like tactical advice, at this level, not knowing a ton about it. But I think you really want to understand what people do versus what they tell you. And there's both. Like you got to have both of it. But then if they are representative as you deliver product for them, if they actually adopt that and use it quite often. I mean, that's what I'd be looking at to see if you're really onto something, and if you're right that they're representative of the broader market. If you can see utilization of product, that's the key thing that I would hone in on to see if you've got it. Versus like qualitative inputs about what they would want you to build. Like, do they actually use it?
The other thing that I'm trying to pay attention to is, are they willing to be a referral to tell the story publicly of the benefit of using the product? I don't know if that's helpful.
Yeah, again, I just map out your entire sales funnel from top of mind awareness all the way down to, consideration and using the service, and understand what does it cost at each step of the funnel.
Okay. Thanks so much.